So there are lots of gaps in the field of addiction treatment. And that is the reason that we try to see how neuroscience in general, and then things like neuroimaging or MRI, could contribute to the field and reshape the future of treatment in addiction medicine. So we start with MRI. What is MRI? So we all know MRI is the kind of an imaging method that could give you an idea about the structure and function of the brain. Sounds good, right? And then we have functional MRI. And in functional MRI, we have resting state and task MRI, right? So there are two types of functional MRIs. While people are resting inside the scanner or they are doing a specific task inside the scanner. So these are the two types of MRI that we have. And in the task-based MRI, for example, in the field of substance use disorder, we do cue exposure. We expose people to drug-related cues or neutral cues, that they have same structure, but they do not have any content related to, for example, this is a neutral one, this is a drug one. We expose people to these cues, the task-based fMRI. And then we see what are the activations that they have in their brain, or what are the connectivities that they have in their brain, right? So we can measure the connectivity, or we can measure activation. So this is what we have as fMRI in the field. And then this is the actual brain activation that you can see with fMRI drug cue reactivity when you see areas that are activated when they see drug-related cues compared to neutral cues. So this is what we call fMRI drug cue reactivity, FDCR, okay? When you want to do a trial, before starting a trial, you need to register the trial somewhere. And one of the most frequent places that you register your trial is clinicaltrial.gov. It's a kind of US-based website, then you need to register your trial, okay? So if you go to clinicaltrial.gov, how many addiction trials, clinical trials, you see there that when they want to design their trial, for example, they want to test a specific medication for addiction treatment in a trial, okay? They need to also report what are the outcome measures that they measure before treatment and after treatment. How many of them they have neuroimaging as their outcome measure? How many of those trials used neuroimaging as a part of their outcome measure to be able to see how that medication or how that specific intervention is changing brain function or structure? So we systematically looked into the database, and we saw that up to 2021, end of 2021, we had over 400 trials that in clinicaltrial.gov, I mean, there are people from Mexico that they registered their trials there, from other parts of the world. But that website already has over 400 trials that they have neuroimaging as their outcome measure in the field of alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, cannabis, other areas, or amphetamine type stimulants. And I realized that you call amphetamine type stimulants ETA, right? So that is kind of in Spanish called ETA. And when you look into these 400 trials, in terms of what types of fMRI measures that they are using, you can see that they have fMRI as the most frequent type of neuroimaging that they are using. So there are other ways, other MRI-based things as well, but fMRI is the most frequent one. Task-based fMRI is the most frequent, and drug cue reactivity is the most frequent one. So the type of fMRI drug cue that I showed you is the most frequent way of using MRI as an outcome measure in a trial right now in the field, okay? We invited everybody who is just the major figures who are doing fMRI drug cue reactivity over the last 25 years. And we have been looking in terms of how many studies people have done, and is there any what we call approved biomarker using fMRI drug cue reactivity, which is the most frequent way of doing fMRI in the field of addiction. And if you look into those studies, first of all, we need to define what is biomarker. Okay? What is the definition of biomarker? To be able to define biomarker, you need to think about addiction as a process, right? So people are healthy, They start to use substances. They develop substance use disorder. Some of them, they go to an intervention, receive an intervention. There are some effects of intervention. There are some adverse effects, some treatment outcomes. And also there are some of them that they have a sort of natural course. They just relapse, they stop, they take it. So there is a sort of a natural course of the disease and also a course for treatment, right? So this is the process of addiction. And if you think about that process, then you can have, based on what we call BEST guideline, is a guideline by FDA, biomarkers could be divided based on this process. For example, you have susceptibility biomarker. What does it mean? It means that what they can do, for example, fMRI, from those who just started using alcohol, or they are social drinkers, and they can predict who is more susceptible to become alcohol dependent, right? So this is called a susceptibility biomarker. So you use fMRI as a biomarker for those who are going to be susceptible to alcohol use disorder, okay? So this is called susceptibility biomarker. So if you just say biomarker in general, it doesn't have any meaning. So do not use biomarker without these specifications I'm going to tell you. So when you want to say biomarker, you should first say what type of biomarker. Is it susceptibility biomarker? Is the biomarker that it could be used for diagnostic purposes? Is the prognostic biomarker? What does it mean, prognostic? It means that it could predict what is going to be natural course of the disease, who is going to die, what are the people who are going to have more challenges. Or predictive biomarker. For example, if you use fMRI and predict who is going to be responding to this treatment, that is called predictive biomarker. And there are other types of biomarker. Does it make sense? So when you talk about biomarker, you have to say what type of biomarker I'm talking about, okay? Does it make sense? And then if I go and look into all fMRI drug cue reactivity studies that people have done so far, and I check that up to July, end of July 2024, and there are over 479 papers over the time. People basically did lots of studies, some like 153 studies with alcohol, so many studies that people have done over the time. And you look into the details of all those studies, in terms of all types of biomarkers, do they provide any support that fMRI drug cue reactivity can be used in any levels of these biomarkers I'm discussing about today? And the answer is yes. So those studies, they provide evidence for diagnostic biomarker, for response biomarker, for severity biomarker, prognostic biomarker, predictive biomarker, monitoring susceptibility biomarkers in different substances with some, these are the significant results, these are non-significant. So we also tested the times, or reported the times that people tried to find a biomarker but they failed, and they reported they failed. So these are non-significant results versus significant results. So there is a good chunk of evidence in the field, in over 400 studies on fMRI drug cue reactivity, that they could be used in these sort of pragmatic ways that are all important for the practice of addiction medicine, addiction psychiatry, right?